This is the 5-inch freestyle quad that I fly all the time. It is the Quadmula Siren F5, and this one has DJI O3. I didn't get a chance to do a build video on this, so today we're going to be building this, which is the new version of the frame that allows you to use DJI O4 Pro. Like its smaller siblings that I've built on this channel before, this is not the cheapest frame, but it is one of the easiest 5-inch frames to build because it comes with everything that you need. It flies beautifully, and if you can see from this one, it takes a hell of a beating as well. I'm going to show you all the tools and the parts that you need, and we're going to go through this build step by step. I'm even going to show you how to configure this in Betaflight afterwards, how to activate the O4 and then bind to your radio. If this is your first time building a quad, I hope that by using this video, you'll see how easy it is to build these and then get to experience the joy of flying something that you built for the first time as well. And maybe some of you, like me, will go from bullshit, I don't want to spend time building anything, I just want to fly. I have built a flying machine. But before I get into this, I do need to give a shout out to Murders FPV. It was his video that inspired me to build this Siren F3 a couple of years ago, and I haven't stopped building since. So without him, I probably wouldn't have been doing this and having as much fun doing it as I am. He's also an incredible freestyle pilot, much better than I am, so go check out his channel. I will leave a link to that below. I always get asked after I do one of these build videos how much this build cost. So I'm going to put this right up here up front so you can see. Just note that the DJI O4 Pro air unit is a huge part of that cost. This is not the cheapest build. You can use cheaper parts, you can use more expensive parts if you want to. The motors and electronics I've used here are what I've found to be the most cost-effective way to build a 5-inch without sacrificing quality or reliability. So if you have other parts that you prefer or can get more easily where you're from, go for it. You'll still be able to follow along, but there will be a few differences in how we build this. As always with my build videos, we're going to go into the detail step by step so that you can follow along. This is going to be a long video, so I'm going to leave timestamps so you can jump around from section to section, go do other things, come back to the video at a later stage if you need to. So grab yourself a coffee, I'm going to put on some music and let's get into the build. So let's get into the parts that you're going to need for this build. You're going to need one of these from Quadmula, which is the Siren F5 Series 2 frame, and that is specifically made for the DJI O4 Pro. Speaking of the O4 Pro, we are going to use the O4 Pro in this build. If you can get hold of one of these, they're a little bit hard to come by at the moment, but by the time you're watching this, maybe they're a little bit easier to get hold of. We're going to use this stack from T-motor, which is the Velox SE Stack. I bought this together with the motors, and they come in a combo pack for like $160 or something like that. But within this, you get the fly controller, you also get the ESC and a bunch of other stuff that's going to help you put this together. But it's a really easy stack to work with. It's been really reliable on all of the other builds that I've used this on, and it's pretty cheap as well. And in that combo pack, I got the Velox V3, which are, I think, some of the cheapest motors that T-motor make. These are the 2207 1950 kV. I normally use the 1750 kV. I accidentally clicked on the 1950 kV one, so we'll see how this goes. I'm sure they're going to be fine if the 1750 ones that I use on my other builds are anything to go by. When it comes to controlling your quad, I'm using one of these, which is an ELRS receiver from Radio Master, which is the RP1V2. This is the listen before talk version, which is what we have to use in Europe. So don't worry if you have something else on that. But this comes with everything you need, including the antenna and also some heat shrink as well, and all the wiring that you need in order to make this work. Before I forget, when you order the frame, you can order some options with it. I've ordered the arm guards plus the O4 pieces and a chin guard as well. I'm probably not going to use the chin guard for this build because I'm going to use a different camera mount. And speaking of the camera mount, I'm not going to be using a variable camera mount. You can order these from Quadmula as well when you order the frame. I'm going to be using the fixed one because it adds a little bit more protection for the O4, and I'm using the 25-degree one. So that ELRS antenna, if you download the mount from Quadmula and get this printed, it's actually not that great. I'm gonna just show you on my other F5. As you can see, that Radio Master antenna is a little bit big to fit in there, so I've had to kind of cable tie it to this. It doesn't really go in there properly. So what I've done for this build, instead of using this one, I found this print, which I'll leave a link to below. It's a really simple mount and it doesn't look like much, but when you put this antenna, let me just grab that, and then when you put the antenna in here, it actually fits pretty well. Doesn't quite look like it at the moment, but let me just push that in. But basically that closes shut like this, and it fits in the frame perfectly. But I'm also conscious that not everyone has access to a 3D printer or can get stuff printed, so I'm also going to show you how to add this in via a cable tie like I did for my Jin F25 build. The F5 is slightly different, the spacing on the frame is a little bit different, so you need a couple of cable ties instead. So for this build, if you're going to do that, you're going to need 3 cable ties, otherwise you only need 1, but I would always have like a few spare anyway, just in case you need to cut them off and reposition things somewhere. I've also printed this stubby mount for the O4 antenna. It is not something I'm going to use in this build video, but the next time you see this quad, I'll probably be using this because it stops me from breaking those antenna off in a crash, which I do very often. And it also has an ELRS antenna mount built into this as well. So it's a pretty nifty bit of kit, and I will leave a link to where I got this from down below. You're going to see me use these arm guards, which are exactly the same ones that you get with the frame from Quadmula, but I've printed these in fluorescent yellow because it makes it easier to find the quad when I crash in like long grass or somewhere else. For props, I'm going to be using these, which are the Ethics watermelon props, which are my favorite props. I love the way that these feel. They last a long time as well. And I can just quickly show you that on some of my other 5-inch quads, I am also running these watermelon props. You don't have to use these. You can use any other 5-inch props that will fit on this quad as well, but these are just the ones that I like to use. You'll see me flying different brands of battery for different size quads, but for a 5-inch quad, this is my favorite one. It is a 6S 1200 milliamp hour Tattoo R-line battery. You can use a much bigger pack on this build if you want more flight time, but this for me is like the perfect balance of flight time and agility because of the weight. That's all for the parts. Let's get into the tools. And this is an 8mm box driver that you're going to use to put the props on and off. You're going to need one of these, which is a 2mm hex driver. You're going to need one of these, which is a 2.5mm hex driver. You're also going to need one of these, which is a 1.5mm hex driver. This one's electronic, but you don't need to have one of those. You're going to need a soldering iron. This one is the TS80 with quick changing tips, and it has USB-C power, and I'm using a large tip on this one at the moment. I've also got a smaller tip for some of the more intricate work, so get one of those as well if you are buying a soldering iron. I have a pair of tweezers. You can use any tweezers. These are my favorite ones. A pair of snips for cutting those wires. You need some solder. I like this TBS solder as it has flux already in it and it's quite nice. You're going to need some flux as well. I like to use this flux pen because it's easy to put on and it's also no clean as well. You're going to need some tape. I'm going to be using this fabric style tape to put the motor wires down onto the arms and protect it a little bit from propeller hits. If you don't have this fabric tape, you can also use just standard electrical tape. This is really easy to get, and you might want to use this for other things anyway, so it's worth having some around. Here's something that's going to make your life easier. This is a piece of blue tack, or over here in Switzerland, it comes white for some strange reason, but you can use this to stick down your electronics as you are soldering them on so they don't start sliding around all over the place. And it also doesn't get stuck to the electronics. However, in this build, I'm going to be using this, which is an Omni Fixo, which is a neat little device to help with soldering. It's kind of like a set of helping hands, except for It's magnetic, a little bit easier to use as well. And I kept getting advertised this on Instagram for ages, so I thought I'd get one and try it out. But it's pretty good. You can reposition stuff very, very easily. But in all honesty, this was kind of a bougie purchase, and you don't need one of these. The blue tack will do just fine. You will need some of this, which is heat shrink, and I suggest getting a box with all different sizes. It's really handy for any of these builds, not just this one, but we will be using that. As an alternative, you can just use electrical tape. It's a little bit more fiddly, but it still works the same. And this is optional, but it makes things easier if you have a heat gun, but you can just use a lighter instead. These next two are optional, but a good idea. This is a cheap multimeter and just allows us to test things before we plug it in properly. And one of these, which is a smoke stopper. This is a TBS one, and this will allow you to kind of plug in the battery, and it will let you know if there is a short circuit or not before you do it for real. So now that you have everything, let's get into the build. Let's grab your Quadmula pack and then open that up. You have everything you need in here, from the frame pieces to all of the screws and standoffs and all of the mounts and everything else as well. Everything kind of comes in the pack with a Quadmula frame, and it's all labeled nicely too. So let's move some of this out of the way so that you just have the bits that you need right now. And then if we open this up, so this is everything that you need for this part of the build. You have the top plate here. You also have the kind of bottom section and also the mid plate right here, and those things are going to sandwich together with this to ensure that you kind of lock all of the arms in place really tightly. There's also this piece, which is like a little bit of extra protection for the O4 camera. So if you can grab this little baggie that says stack screw pack on it, and then we can open this up, we can get building with the frame. Let's just tip all of this out here. Okay, so inside you have this little rubber tubing which helps with the vibration dampening, and these long screws here, and that rubber tubing is literally going to go over the top of this screw, and this screw is going to hold your stack in place. So what I want you to do is go ahead and pick up this piece here, which is the kind of locking mechanism, and this mid plate too. And what this does, it's going to go onto the back of this plate here like this. In fact, we should probably turn this around, because as the screws are countersunk and they'll fit flush with the bottom of here. So just make sure that the countersunk holes are on the outside there. Grab one of the long screws, and then we're just gonna put this plate in the right place over the top, and as you line that up, you can just screw that in by hand a little bit, just so it's poking through, and that will hold. Then we're gonna do the same with the other 3 screws. And then I'm gonna grab this hex driver and put this through. This is why I have an electric one, mainly because these screws take a little while. You can do this with a manual screwdriver, it just takes a little bit longer, but I'm gonna do this with all 3 of the other ones as well. And once you're done with those, you should have something that looks like this. Just those 4 screws kind of poking out. This is where your stack is going to mount. Now I just want you to grab the plastic tubing that comes in that pack, and you are going to thread this over the top of one of the screws. You just simply put it on there and then twist it down, and it will go all the way down. You don't want to go all the way to the bottom. We kind of want to leave a little bit of a gap at the end there, and I'll show you why in just a second. But just grab one of these stack screw nuts, put it up against there just to measure, and then we're going to cut this right there. And the reason why we're doing this is because now when we screw this down, you will leave a little bit of thread at the top. Hopefully that's big enough for this nut, because when you put your stack on later on, you will screw that nut onto there. So go ahead and do the same for the other 3 stack screws. And hopefully you'll have something that looks like this. Okay, so now grab this little baggie here, which has your bottom plate screws. I'm just going to separate these out so you can see what we have in there. We have some short screws, some kind of medium length screws, and then we also have some long screws as well. And these are going to be used to attach the arms as well as the standoffs to that bottom plate. Speaking of the arms, let me just show you how those go on. You'll see this long straight part here. That's just going to go into the locking mechanism here. And the arms are used left, right, back and front, just depending on the orientation. So you can't put them on the wrong way either. So grab your 2mm hex driver. We're going to now add the bottom plate and the arms onto the frame. So grab the bottom plate here and just make sure the countersunk screw heads are facing outwards. And then we're going to grab one of the arms. I'm going to grab this rear one here, and we're just going to put that flat side into the frame like this. And then what you're going to do is grab one of these medium-sized screws, and that's going to go closest to the center of the frame like this. This isn't going to hold the arm in completely, it's just going to tighten that down a little bit. So I'm just going to put that in. And then you'll notice that I've left that a little bit loose. You don't want to tighten that all the way down because otherwise the other arms won't be able to fit in there very easily. So as you go through, you can start to tighten this down a little bit more. We're just going to do this same process for all 4 of those arms. But once you've done that and tightened things up, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, so now you're going to grab the long screw and you're going to add this into the other countersunk screw hole right here. This is the bit that's actually going to hold the arm in. And I'm just going to put this into the back arm here like this. Try and get a good camera angle for you as well. And we're just going to tighten that all the way through the frame. And this is another reason why I normally use an electric driver, but for the purposes of this video, so you don't get confused what I'm using, I'm going to be using this one here. But just put that all the way through the frame like so. And then we're just going to do exactly the same with the other 3 arms. And once you have all of this tightened down, you should have something that looks a bit like this. Now, grab the baggie with the standoffs in it, and you'll see that you have 2 longer standoffs and then 6 shorter ones. The 2 longer ones will go at the front of the frame where the camera is, as there's a wider gap there than there are in the other parts of the frame. But we have these 4 short screws that are going to go in the front and the back. So grab one of these little screws, and then we can just add this into the bottom of the frame like this. And then I'm just going to screw this into the frame. And you're going to do the same for the other side as well. Then what you can do is take one of the standoffs, the longer ones, and just basically hand screw that in on the top there. And then just do the same on the other side. And then you should have something that looks like this. Next, take one of the shorter standoffs and you're going to add it to this screw here that's been exposed. That should go on fairly quickly. We're going to do the same on all of the other arms as well. And now all you're going to do is take the last 2 screws. We're going to put those into this back part of the plate, same as we did before. And then you're going to grab those 2 last standoffs and add those onto the frame as well. And then you'll end up having something that looks like an actual FPV quad. And now that you've got the frame built, we can start adding components to it. And the first one that we're going to get to is the DJI O4. So grab the camera mount that you have. As I said before, this is a different color because I reprinted this, but you just kind of slide it on over the standoffs here at the front. And in hindsight, when building this, it's actually easier to add the camera to this print before you put it into the frame. But I'll show you how I built it anyway. Now you're just going to grab the DJI O4 Pro, and when you're mounting this, you can mount this in the right way up, but you end up having to use these screws here, and then it's a bit painful to open this up if you need to change the antenna, etc. So I always mount this upside down. You also have mounting holes on the bottom that are specifically for that, so you can leave that mounted and open up the air unit. But it's going to mount in about like this. You have the option of both 25 by 25 and 20 by 20 mounting patterns in there, and the Quadmula frame has both. So just go into the little baggie that comes with the frame, which is for the O4 pieces, and there is a little screw pack here that is designed specifically for mounting the O4 air unit. Also in this pack is this little rubber bung for the USB-C port. I'm just going to add this in here so I don't lose it, but that helps to protect the quad, as that air unit is probably the most expensive part of this build. You're just going to place the O4 air unit in the back here and then start adding the screws in depending on which mounting pattern that you want to use. I'm using the wider pattern on this build. Hopefully it will give it a little bit more stability, but you're just going to add in all of those screws like so. So that's the air unit mounted. Now we're going to work on the camera. So with the camera, it comes with these screws already in there, but we're not going to use those. We're actually going to replace those for the ones that come with the frame, and they have these little spacers and countersunk screws, which means that you can really tighten down on the TPU without breaking it. So we're just going to remove these 4 screws first. Once you have those out, we can get the other screw pack out and ready to use. All you want to do is get one of these countersunk screws and then add in to the spacer, and then we're going to add this onto the bottom part of the camera, and only the bottom part. We don't need to do the top part yet. We just have to fit this into the mount. So we're going to do this on both sides. Let's just get a screw there as well. Add the spacer on, and then I'm just going to put this in here, and I'm just kind of tighten it slightly, very gently. You don't need to over tighten this. And so that camera now will fit within this mount. There's like a little hole in there for those spacers to fit. So we're just going to bend this out a little bit. As I was saying earlier on, this is a little bit easier if you put this in beforehand, but otherwise the TPU is flexible enough to just slide that in. And you'll know when you got it in the right place because it just kind of fits in there nicely like that. And once you have both of those in, you can take one of the other screws. I like to put it into the spacer like this, and then you kind of just line up that screw, and then you're just gonna screw this in. It takes a little bit of pressure at first because you're also trying to get that spacer into the TPU. You can just put that spacer into the TPU separately. It's actually a little bit more difficult to do it that way, so I just kind of screw it in and it will sit correctly as well. And we're just going to grab the other side, do exactly the same as well. You'll notice that I'm not using the electric part of this screwdriver for this because you don't want to over tighten the screws on the camera. You just want to kind of have it nicely sit in there until you feel a little bit of resistance. Now that the camera is in, we're going to dry fit the stack. And what I mean by dry fit is that we're not going to wire this in and solder it all up. We just want to see how this fits in comparison to some of the other components, just to make sure it fits in the orientation that we want it. In the box with the stack, you get this pack as well, which has a capacitor and some of these gummies. And in that pack, you have these 2 different sets of gummies. For this build, we're actually going to use the smaller ones, and we're going to use them on the top and the bottom, although I typically use the other one just to make sure that there's some clearance in there, but we're just going to use the smaller ones for this. And there are various different ways of getting this in. This is usually the most painful part, but you just kind of get one corner in there, and then you can kind of squeeze the other side in, and then sometimes it's a little bit tricky, so I'm just going to use the end of the screwdriver. Just be very careful if you do this. You don't want to split the gummy or worse, damage any of the kind of electronics on the ESC. But if you just ease that in gently. Of course, now that I'm doing this on camera, it's taking longer than it does usually, but that will go in just like this. And of course, as I'm doing the other ones, they all went in very easily. I didn't even need the screwdriver for them. This is what it will look like when it's done. And we're going to also do the same with the flight controller as well. So we're going to take some of those gummies, still using the smaller ones, but with the flight controller, the corners are missing on the holes there. So you can kind of squeeze them a little bit and then they just slide straight in like that. And then we'll just put the others in the same way as well. And you'll have something that looks like this. Okay, so you're going to take the ESC and the XT60 power lead, and we're just going to put them in this orientation. And I've built one of these before, so I know that this is the best way round. And the reason for this is that the Quadmula frame comes with a double capacitor, and I want to fit that in. It won't fit the back here, so I'll put it in the front, which means that the XT60 needs to come out the front as well, because you want that as close to the ESC as possible. So let's just put this out the way for a second, and then I want you to grab the flight controller, because what we're going to do is just dry fit this as well, just to see what this is like. And just remember that arrow should be facing towards the front of the quad. And now we just need to look at this, and you can see that these two gummies aren't touching, which means that actually there's not enough space there, and that's because of these ports on the stack here touching and not allowing it to kind of sit flush. The good news is though, in the Quadmula frame, in the stack pack that we used earlier, they actually have a solution in there, which are these little black gummies here, and when you pull the middle out, they fit nicely over the stack like this. And for this build, you want to use 2 of these on each of those stack screws. And now hopefully when you put the flight controller back on, we should be able to see, yep, that's perfect. There's no gap there anymore, so there's enough space. And then we also have just enough space on the top of these screws to fit the nuts on there later on. And just to show you what I mean about the capacitor, like there is not a lot of room in the back here to fit 2 caps this size. So I'm going to fit this on the front here, just behind the camera. And that also gives me just about enough space to get the XT60 in there too. Do spend the time getting this dry fit done and then having a look at what fits where, so you don't have issues later on in the build. Okay, so let's get back to the O4 air unit. We're going to fit the antenna now so that they're not flapping around. And as I said earlier, we're going to be using the original one that came with the frame, although I will probably switch to this stubby mount a bit later on, as I'll probably break off the antenna otherwise. Okay, so in order to fit the antennas, you're going to need your 1.5mm hex driver again, and then we're just going to gently remove each of the 4 screws here, because we need to kind of pull the air unit apart a little bit. Once that is open, be very careful because this is still attached and you don't want to pull the lid off. All we're going to do is grab a set of tweezers. Let's just move that to the side a little bit if it will go. And you see right here, there's 2 UFL connectors with the antenna. So we'll just grab our tweezers, and then you want to be very, very careful with this. You do not want to break the connector on this, but just use your tweezers, get them slightly underneath the connector, and then just gently wiggle it upwards, and eventually it will come off. But have patience with this, just be very, very careful, take your time. If you do pull this off, it's not a very easy fix, so be careful. Okay, you're going to grab this 3D printed piece that comes with the frame, and inside each of these tubes is another tube which kind of allows this to fit in. So you can pull that out, and you're just going to thread the wire through here. You don't want to push this all the way in yet because it won't fit back into the actual antenna holder. So we're just going to push this back in like this. And then what you're going to do is apply a little bit of pressure and you're just going to twist this, and then it will kind of start to slide in. Doesn't have to go in too far, but that's good enough. Now you're just going to do the same on the other side. We'll push that in as well, and then you should end up with something that looks like this. Okay, now we need to fit this back into the air unit. I'm actually just gonna twist this around a little bit just so that it's in the right orientation, so I can put this back on the pads. When you're putting this back on the pad, you just have to line it up and then apply a bit of pressure down. You will hear this go into place, so you'll feel it as well. It will just kind of click into place. Just be very careful that you kind of got that lined up. We'll just do the same on the other side here as well. This is a little bit fiddly, but it's fairly easy once you've got it in there. Then just put the screws back into the air unit like this, and then you can fit your antenna. What we're going to do is actually pull the wires from the O3 through in just a second, because we don't want those hanging out the back there like that. So we're going to fold these in and just on top of the air unit here, and then just like that, and then we can push this antenna mount onto the standoffs at the rear. And that will kind of click into place just like that. So now that is your O3 air unit complete and ready to go. We can now move on to the other electronics that we're going to fit in here. So the first thing we're going to do is grab the ESC, and if you're using blue tack, grab your blue tack and stick this down so that it doesn't move around. I'm not going to be using blue tack, as I said. I've got this bougie new toy that I've been dying to try out, and so let's just get that open and ready. I'm going to clip this in, and I'm just going to clip it in this way. Just want to make sure I avoid the pads on this. Okay, and then just add another couple of clips so that it's stable. Just don't want to be anywhere near the pads because I'm going to be using those in just a second. Okay, so that's fairly secure now. Okay, get your soldering iron. I'm using the bigger chisel type tip at the moment, and we're going to prepare all of these pads along here, which are the motor wire pads. So we're going to grab the flux pen and then just cover the flux, cover the pads with the flux, just like this. Then what I'm going to do is take my soldering iron. I'm running at about 390 to 395 degrees. We're going to take some solder, and we're just going to put a little bit of solder onto the soldering iron because that helps with the conductivity. And then I'm going to heat up this pad in the corner here like this, just a little bit, and then I'm going to add some solder to it. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the next pad down. But let's just add a little bit more solder in there. Going to add a bit of heat, bit of solder. And we're just going to do this for each of the pads down there. You don't need to hold that soldering iron on there very long either. And you're going to do exactly the same on the other side as well. So we're just going to prep all of these pads because we're going to use all of these anyway. And now comes the more interesting part if you're new to soldering. I'm going to add a bit of flux here on these battery pads, but these battery pads take a lot more heat to get the solder going. So I'm just going to add a fair amount of flux there. I'm going to grab that soldering iron again, and then we're going to place that soldering iron kind of flat onto the pad. I'm not show you what I mean here. And we'll just heat that up a little bit, and then we can start to add some solder on there. And you'll notice it kind of, one takes a bit more solder than the motor pads, but it also takes a bit more to heat these up, especially the ground pads. So, and I just want to add a little bit more solder there. So I'm just going to heat that up again, add a bit of extra solder. And now we can come on to the positive pad, which doesn't take as much heat. It still takes a bit of heat because it's still a large pad, but not as much as the ground pad. So we're just going to heat that up, start to add solder in here. And that is your ESC fully prepped and ready to go. We're going to add everything to that in a second, but now we need to prep the flight controller as well. And the thing I love about this T-motor flight controller is not only is it value for money, but it also has ports for everything too. So actually there's no soldering required to prep this at all. We're just going to use some of the connectors that came with the stack and also the DJI O4 as well. So we're actually going to use these two ports here, one for the DJI and one for the receiver. And let's take a look at what's in the little baggie that came with the stack, just so that we can get that ready. And you're going to need something that's going to connect to the port that we want, which this one does, but I did change over to this connector instead because the wires are in a better place for later on. You're also going to need this connector with the two tabs, and then also the one from the DJI O4 Pro, and we can go ahead and put this straight into this port right here. I think that's the only one that it fits in on this flight controller. And then we're going to add this in here. Remember, we're going to change that out later on for something with a different color. And then the one with the two tabs will go in this port right here. And that will go to your ESC a little bit later on. So that is the flight controller prepped and ready to go. We don't need to do any soldering whatsoever on there unless you want to add a buzzer or LEDs or something else. Now we're going to add the power pigtail onto the ESC. And if you look closely at the ends of these wires, they're actually pre-tinned already, so you don't need to prep these. Some people do it anyway. I'm not going to for this. I'm just going to use this pigtail as it is. T-motor are pretty good with that, but I am still going to add some flux just to make sure that that will solder nice and tightly. And we're going to add some flux as well to the soldering prep that we did already. So grab the positive wire with a pair of tweezers. You don't want to be holding this by hand because it will get hot. And you're just going to place that wire on top of the pad. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the soldering iron on top of the end of the wire. This will take a little bit of time, but eventually it will heat up. The solder will then melt, and then you should end up with this attaching to the pad. Once that's melted, you want to remove the soldering iron and then just hold it there in place just for a little bit, just so that that connection goes. I'm just going to add a little bit more heat there just to make sure that it's fully seated, and then we'll just hold that for a second for it to cool down, and then once we let it go, it should stay in place. Okay, you're going to do the same with the black wire, and remember, this takes a little bit more heat, so it's going to take a little bit longer to heat up. But we're going to do the same, grab it with a pair of tweezers, and then just start adding heat on top until eventually the solder will start to melt, and then that connection will get made. I'm doing this in real time, not speeding this up, so you can see how long it takes for that to happen. Okay, that's starting to go now, and then we're just gonna place that back on there for a second and just hold that steady, and eventually that will cool down enough that we can let it go, and it should just stay in place again. something I'm going to do is actually add a little bit more solder onto this, but in order to do that, I'm going to just make sure that I've got something holding the wires right here. And the reason why I'm adding additional solder to the top is because I want to make sure that I've got enough solder on there to attach the capacitors as well, which I'm going to solder onto the top of these pads as well. You can also solder this onto the bottom part of the pad. I prefer to do it on the top for this because of the amount of space that we have. So grab your soldering iron again. We're just going to slightly heat up the solder on top, and then we're just going to start adding a little bit of extra solder to the top here. And I'm just going to add a little bit more as well, just so that that's neat and tidy. Okay, perfect. And then I'm going to do the same on the red wire too. Just remember that doesn't require as much heat, so you want to be a little bit quicker with the red wire. Okay, let's see how that looks. Actually, I'm going to add just a little bit more, a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to these things. I want it to look nice too. So I'm just going to add a bit more on there, and yep, that looks much better now. And you can see we have that bit of extra solder on top there to add the other wires in from the cap. Speaking of which, we're going to add the two capacitors. We're going to get these prepared, soldered up, and then we're going to add them onto the pads there. So open up the baggie that came with the Quadmula frame. You'll have like a 3D print in there, plus these two giant capacitors and a couple of wires. And what we're going to do is we're going to have both of the negatives facing each other, and we're just going to add this into the 3D print here. So it should look like this. And you're going to take some of that heat shrink now, because we're going to start adding this to the wires as they are. So, and if you have some heat shrink, this is the time to use it. So just cut a little section of this off here, because we're going to add this to each of these wires first. And it just needs a little tiny amount, and we're going to slide that over the top. You can do this with electrical tape as well. It is just a little bit more fiddly, so using heat shrink is much quicker, much easier, and it's a bit neater as well. So we're just going to add these to the two negative wires here, and this is just going to stop those from kind of shorting out on the other wires. And we're just going to take those and twist them together like this. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for the positive wires. We're going to bend these slightly together so we can see where they're going to cross over. We're going to grab some more heat shrink, or use electrical tape if you don't have heat shrink. I'm just going to cut a little section off here, and then put another one as well. And then we're just going to add another one, just make it a little bit longer. And I'm just going to add this onto here like this, and then add the other piece onto the other side here like so. Yeah, just make sure that's seated at the bottom. And then I'm going to quickly use a heat gun on this off camera, because I don't have a camera near to where that is, and it should end up looking something like this. We now want to prep the negative lead from those capacitors to attach it to a wire. So grab your soldering iron again and some solder, and all we're going to do is just simply add a little bit of heat to this connector that we twisted earlier and turned into one. We're just going to join those together with a little bit of solder. So we're just going to add some heat and then add some solder in there, and that will make it basically like one connector now. So now that's done, we're looking at this connector here, and it's a little bit long. And what that means is that it just doesn't bend like a wire. And we're going to attach a wire to this anyway, but we just want to make sure that we're not carrying an excessive amount of metal here, because that doesn't flex as well. So I'm just going to put the wire up to this, and I kind of want to connect this as close to where those two connectors connect to each other. So it looks good about there. I think we're just going to bend this down a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is snip off the end of this like so, and that's going to ping. Okay, now you're going to grab your blue tack, and we're just going to prepare that wire. So I'm just going to tin it a little bit on the end there, like so. And then we're going to add this to that negative connector. And we're just using a pair of tweezers here because this wire is going to heat up very quickly. Just going to add a little bit of heat, and then you should see that that then attaches to that very nicely. Perfect. Now we're just going to grab a little bit of heat shrink, just take a small section of this, and we're going to feed that down over the wire to where the wire connects to the capacitor. We're just going to push that over that joint right there. And once that's on, you can go ahead and heat that up. I'm going to do that off camera. Now we're going to do exactly the same for the positive side. So we're just going to add some heat shrink to those connectors. Then we're going to twist the connectors together. You're going to add some solder to the connector. You're going to trim that connector down a little bit. You're then going to prep the wire by tinning it. We're going to add that wire onto the connector, just with a little bit of heat. We're then going to put some heat shrink onto that connection. Then we're going to use a heat gun on it. Then we're going to use a heat gun on it off camera. And now you should have something that looks a little bit like this. We're now going to mount that capacitor to the frame by using the two standoffs here behind the camera. And I didn't actually film that bit, me pushing it down on there, but you just put it in here and it will look like this. And you have just completed the hardest part of this build. So everything to come is going to be a lot easier. So you'll notice that I've shortened these wires down, and then we're just going to tin them a little bit so that we are ready to solder that onto the ESC. So go ahead and grab the ESC, and we're going to fit this into the frame. So what you want to do is just kind of slightly bend those wires out of the way as you're putting this in. It's a bit of a tight squeeze now, but we're just going to line that up, and then if we can line this up. Okay, and then we're just going to put that down a little bit. We're just going to bend this XT60 lead a little bit, and then we're just going to have, I'm just going to move this out of the way so you can see that I've kind of pulled these wires through here, and then I'm just going to bend this a little bit so that it's sitting over that pad right there to make it a little bit easier to solder. And I'm going to do the same on this side as well. Okay, so we're going to flux this again just a little bit more. Never have too much flux. And now I'm going to grab my tweezers. I'm going to pull that over to the pad. And then we're just going to add a little bit of heat. And that is now attached. We're going to do the same on the other side. Although I might just turn this around a little bit to make it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to grab that wire right there, just bend it into place and add a bit of heat. And just add a little bit more. Okay, and just hold that for a sec. Perfect. Okay, and now those two are attached. And quickly, before I forget, you might want to add this cable in now. You can do this a little bit later on when you've installed everything, but it's much harder. So grab this cable, the bit that says ESC, there's like a little tab on there that you can pull off in this video, but you want to add this in around about now. Just makes it a little bit easier for later on. Now that that's done, let's move on to the motors. And we're going to bolt all of the motors onto the frame first before we start to chop and solder wires to the ESC. So you're going to fit the motor onto the frame just loosely like so. And then you're going to take 2 of the bolts that came with the motor. And this is going to require a 2.5mm hex driver. And we're just going to add these into the 2 slots that are closest to the body of the frame. And I'll show you why in just a second. So we're going to put that one in here. I'm going to take a second one. And we're just going to also add that in to this side of the motor. And we're just going to make sure that those are tightened up a little bit. Now what I want you to do is grab your arm guard, and if you don't have arm guards you can use all 4 screws from the motor, but we're gonna grab this arm guard and slip it on over the end of the arm here. And you'll notice that it's got these 2 weird holes in the end. So within that pack that you get with Quadmula, you get both a screw and a set of these spacers as well. So what we want to do is get one of these spacers with one of the countersunk screws, add this in, and then just screw that in. It takes a little bit of pressure because you're trying to fit this into the TPU as well, but it also stops this TPU from splitting, which means that you can really tighten this down. Once that's tight, we're going to grab another one and we're going to do the same on the other side. And just to remember, if you ordered these from Quadmula, it will be a different color. I just like to use yellow. And so I'm gonna put this in here and then tighten that down. As you start to tighten that down, it will pull itself into that TPU. So don't worry if you can't fit that straight in by hand. Okay, and that is one motor done. And now you're going to do the same for all of the other motors as well. I'm just going to speed up this bit a little bit so you're not sitting here watching me screw things into the frame, but you just want to do exactly the same as what we just did there for each of those motors. Once you're done, we're going to tape down the wires to the arms as well, because this is going to make it a lot easier to position this for soldering. And also, if you end up with a prop striking the wires, this will hopefully protect it a little bit. As I said before, you can use electrical tape. Some people, like my brother, use braided mesh and then wrap that in tape as well, which protects the quad a little bit better. For me, I just like to use this fabric tape. It's simple, cheap, and does the job. So we're just going to flatten these wires out, and then I'm going to add this in about here, which, you know, I'm going off of my experience here, but this is about where the prop end would be. So we're just going to wrap that around and then just have that sit within there for a second. And you're going to do the same for all 3 of the other arms. And that should be nice and neat. So next we're going to cut the wires to the right length. And on this build, I'm actually going to go around the back of the standoff here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the wire over towards the pad, which is going to give me a good idea of what that looks like. It is always better to cut that a little bit too long than a little bit too short, which is what I'm doing right here. That's going to fit right there. And then we're going to do this third one as well. And I'm just going to cut that right there. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to bend the ends of these wires over. And the reason why I do this is because it positions the wire much better for when you go to solder it, because it's kind of sitting straight in the right direction already. And so now those are bent. Let's take a look. Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to do the same with all three of the other motor wires as well. I'm just going to bend those around the standoffs, and then you should end up with something that looks like this. What we now need to do is prep those wires for soldering. So you're just going to pull off a little bit at the end of the wire, and then we're going to tin the end of that wire. Just add a little bit of heat. Some of that smoke going. Just a little bit of a safety notice. You probably should either wear a mask or be in a well ventilated area, or like I'm using here, I'm using a fan to get rid of those fumes so I'm not breathing that in. And once you have those wires prepped, yep, you guessed it, we're going to do the same on all three of the other motors as well. Now we're going to add some flux to those pads that we're going to solder these wires onto, and we're just going to do all of these in one go, and the other side as well. Now you're going to grab a motor wires with your tweezers. Sorry, this is a really bad camera angle for this, but you're just going to put that wire on top of the pad, add some heat as we have done before, and then just hold it there until the solder connection is made. It doesn't matter which wire you put where, we can always change the motor direction in Betaflight afterwards. And don't worry, I'll show you how to do that a little bit later in the video. And we're just going to add the other two wires for this motor next to this too. Again, sorry for this really awful camera angle. And we're just going to take the final wire for this motor, put it onto the next pad. Luckily, the angle is a little bit better on this one, so you can actually see what I'm doing. But again, just adding that wire on top of the pad, adding a little bit of heat, and then holding it down. Perfect. So we're now going to do this for all of the other motors as well, and I'm just going to speed this up so that you don't have to watch me do this for the next 10 minutes. As you're doing this, just remember to work quickly. You don't need a lot of time to heat the pads up when you're working at 390 degrees. Now we're going to prep the ELRS receiver. So grab your Bluetech again, or if you have some helping hands, use that too. And then we're just going to go across these pads, these 4 pads, and just tin them in preparation for the wires. So what I'm actually going to do with this, because it's a bit smaller, is I'm actually going to change the tip on my soldering iron for a smaller one. I'll show you how easy it is to do with this. And while that soldering iron's heating up, all I'm going to do is flux these pads just like that. And now we're just going to take some solder. We're going to heat up. Let's just move these out of the way so I don't burn them or anything. Going to heat up that pad and then just add a bit of solder to tin it there. I haven't sped this up. This is in real time, so you can see just how quick you can apply heat and tin these pads. You don't need a lot of time on that pad. And we'll just do this last one here too. Okay, we're now ready to get the wires ready. And as I said earlier, I'm going to use this connector, not the one that I had connected earlier in the video. And what we're going to do is just make sure that this plugs in, because what then happens is that as you plug this in, we should have the red and black wires corresponding now with what it says on the flight controller, which it does. So we can now take this out, if I can get this back out again. And what we want to do is prep the wires on the other side. You don't need to chop these down. We can adjust the length of this slightly just by twisting it a little bit later on. So just grab some blue tack, or you can use your helping hand here. I'm just going to use blue tack. And we just want to separate out these wires a little bit so it makes it easier to solder each one. And now you're just going to tin the ends of these wires just like we have when we're prepping all of the wires. So just add a little bit of heat onto the end of the wire, touch the solder on the other side, and that will suck it straight into the wire. And just go ahead and do the other ones too. So looking at the wiring diagram of the flight controller, there's actually two versions of this flight controller, and I don't want people to get confused. So I'm going to show you now how to check out where you need to solder which wire. So this is the flight controller. On the bottom left, you've got two connection ports, and the one to the left, we are going to put that towards this ELRS receiver. And I've put the wiring diagram right here, and I'll leave this on screen for a little bit so you can screenshot that if you want it. But I'm also going to do this step by step with each wire so you can follow along as well. So we're going to grab the black wire here, and you can see that that is going to go onto the pad with the minus, which is this one on the end right here. Next, we're going to add this red wire to the 5V pad right here, which is the next one along. The blue wire is coming from the RX, so we're going to add this to the TX on the actual receiver. So RX goes to TX and TX goes to RX, if that's not confusing at all, but that blue wire is going to go on this pad right here. And then finally, we're going to grab the green wire, and we're going to put this, which is coming from the TX, and we're going to add this to the RX pad on the receiver chip here. So now that the wires are all soldered in, you're going to want to grab the heat shrink that comes with the receiver. Just place that over here like this, and then we're just going to heat that up with a heat gun off camera, and it will look something like this, which will just isolate it from shorting out on the frame or anything else when we put it in. So you can now grab the flight controller, and that little plug that we added to the ESC earlier on, we're going to add that into the flight controller right here. There is only one place that this cable will go and fit into the flight controller, so I'm just going to add it in there, and then just make sure that you push down on this a little bit just to make sure that it's completely secure. And you just want to grab the little spacers, just make sure those are back in there too on each of those stack screws on top of the ESC. Now go ahead and grab the flight controller, and then just make sure that you're positioning it this way around with the arrow facing forwards. And we're just going to see how that fits in there. Perfect. Now in your stack screw pack, you'll have these little TPU nuts. We're just going to take one of these and put it onto the top of one of those stack screws, and then you can use your finger. There's like a little bit of grip on the top there, and then just twist that down just a little bit like that. And then you're going to do the same for each of the other three stack screws. And now hopefully your stack looks something like this, and the stack should feel fairly solid as well. Now this cable that is poking out here, you want to plug this into the DJI O4 unit, but before we're going to do that, because it's quite long, we're going to twist this around just to kind of tidy this up and shorten the length of it a little bit. So, and it should go in fairly easily Yep, just like that. And now you're gonna have this excess wire, but we're gonna do something with that in just a second. But for now, we're gonna take the receiver and we're gonna do the same kind of thing. So we're gonna actually twist this wire as well, just to shorten that up so that it's not flapping around anywhere. And you wanna make sure that that cable goes between the stack and the standoff there. And don't worry, we're gonna cinch all of this down in just a second and make sure that's all tidy, but you wanna pull the ELRS antenna in between the two DJI O4 antenna like this. Okay, so you want to grab your multimeter and you will have a mode that basically allows you to test for continuity, and it will like make a sound. This one makes a sound and lights up. And just to show you what I mean before I do test this, let me touch these together. You'll see the light going off when there is continuity. So what I'm going to do is attach this to the positive and negative terminals in the XT60. You'll see the numbers bounce around because there is some residue left over, and then it kind of settles down, but there's no light, there's no sound that comes from that, which tells me that there is no continuity between those two ports. I'm going to do another test as well. I'm going to test with the live port, and then I'm also going to put this onto the USB-C. And again, the numbers will bounce around for a little bit, but there's no sound, there's no light. And then I will test the same on a ground pad on the flight controller as well and get the same result. So that looks like we are good to go. I'm just going to make sure that the ground on the XT60 has continuity with one of the pads. You can see the light going off there, so that is all good too. And then just to double check again with the positive and a ground pad there, and there's no continuity. Now it's time to plug in, so grab your battery and smoke stopper. And we're just going to plug the smoke stopper into the XT60. Yep, just make sure that's in the right way. And then we're going to plug the battery into the other side, and hopefully we get a good tone. That all seems fine, and the smoke stopper didn't trip either. So that should be good to plug in. You won't get the motor sounds at this point because we haven't configured those yet, but we'll do that in just a second. So let's just plug that in. We've got a good tone and there's no magic smoke, so I think we're good to go. Now it's time to configure this. So grab your USB-C and plug this into the port on the flight controller. And in Betaflight, you'll get these two warnings that come up. Don't worry, we're going to resolve these in just a second. But for now, just close this window. And the first thing we're going to do is make sure that the quad is sitting on a flat and level surface, and then hit calibrate accelerometer, which will hopefully get rid of one of those warnings. Okay, that's perfect. Now what we're going to do is just move the quad around, and you should see that move exactly the same as what it does on that diagram there, which it is. So that's perfect. That's the accelerometer calibrated. We don't have a magnetometer, so we can come up here to the ports tab. And this ports tab looks highly confusing. The first time I did this, I had no idea what I was doing, but we're gonna show you exactly what to do right now. So on the flight controller, these are the two ports that we're using. And this ELRS port has T3 and R3, which makes it UART3, which is a serial port. And then on the bottom one here, this is what we've got the DJI plugged into, which is T2 and R2, which is the UART2 port, and that's going to be the MSP port that we're going to turn on. This sounds confusing. I'm just going to show you really quickly how to do this in Betaflight. Don't worry, we're going to make this really simple. So we're going to turn off UART1, and your DJI is plugged into UART2, so we're going to turn that on here because it's the MSP port. And then what we're going to do is just turn off UART6, and then your receiver, which is the serial port, is going to be on UART3 here. So you want to turn that on, and then you can save and reboot that. Okay, so at least one of the warnings has gone. We're going to fix this one in just a second, so close that for now. And then we're going to come over here to configuration. And within this configuration, we're just going to check that a few things are in here. Now, there's not a lot to change in here, but I am going to add a craft name because when I'm doing videos and things, I want to just make sure that I'm sure of which craft I was flying at the time. So I'm going to add this in here. You can add a pilot name if you want to. I don't do that. And then I'm just going to change my angle here on the camera to 25, as I'm using a fixed angle mount for this. Okay, really important, set this arming angle to 180, so if you get stuck in a tree, you can still arm the quad. And then a little bit further down here, we're just going to check that everything else is on, like so air mode, yes, we want that on, and we also want to check that the OSD is on as well. Everything else I'm not going to be using or touching on this. And then on the right hand side, we don't need to change anything on this board alignment, as we have the arrow pointing the right way on the flight controller. But if you're doing a build where you had to angle that slightly differently, you can change those settings right here. Okay, so a little bit further down, we don't need to worry about that or anything, but we're going to also go to this, which is RX lost. So we want the motors to beep when it loses signal. And then I'm also going to turn on RX set, which allows us to use the beeper on the motors as part of the radio. Everything else down here, I'm just going to leave turned on, and then we're just going to hit save and reboot. And once that connects again to Betaflight, you'll still see the warning, don't worry about that. But we're going to come over to power and battery. Now, if you're using a high volt lithium battery, you want to change the maximum cell voltage to 4.4. We're not doing that because we're going to use a standard LiPo. Okay, come down to presets, and we're going to choose this Superfly 5-inch preset. And then we're going to come into here. We're just going to select 6S LiPo. And then I'm just going to select ELRS here. I don't need to worry about the freestyle rates because I'm going to set my own. And then we're just going to save and reboot again. Okay, so come back over to the presets menu right here. And then we're going to type in, wrong one. We're going to type in the search here, WTF. This is going to allow us to set up our OSD. So what you want to do is just come down to here, and then we're going to check UART2, which is where our DJI Air unit is plugged into. So go ahead and press pick and then save and reboot. And that should allow your OSD to be configured correctly. We're going to come down to PID tuning. And you can see some of the settings that the preset has changed in here. We don't need to change any of this. It flies perfectly fine like this. You can always make this better if you're a perfectionist, but it will get you 95% the way here. Okay, so right now we're going to come up to here, which is rate profile settings. And I'm going to change this to my own rates. But if you already know your rates, add them in here. Otherwise, you can just leave this stock. You don't have to touch it. But for me, I use actual rates. And then right here, I'm going to change this curve. So I set my center sensitivity to 140. My max rate, I want to actually make this spin faster when I go all the way. So I'm going to set that to 750. And then I like to fly with a ton of expo, and you can see what this does to the curve. And this allows me to have a lot of control when I'm kind of in the center section of that stick. But when I deflect it all the way, then it ramps up to 750 degrees a second. Pitch, I'm going to add exactly the same rate in here. And then for yaw, I actually have the same center sensitivity, but I have the max rate a little bit lower at 700, and then the expo again at 0.8. And that is my rates setup. I'm not going to set up multiple profiles in here. On the throttle side, I don't need to touch anything on here. I will use a linear throttle curve here. I don't need to add any expo. I don't want to limit the throttle either. That should be fine for a 5-inch. Okay, we're going to hit save. Perfect. So now that is saved onto the quad. We now want to configure the receiver, but we're not ready to do that yet. So go ahead and unplug your quad, as this won't work. We need to bind this to the radio. So if you press the system key, go to Express LRS, and then a little bit further down here, you will see something that says bind. I'm not gonna try and press that now, but what we're gonna do is power on the quad 3 times really quickly. So that's 1, unplug, 2, unplug, and then the 3rd time we're going to plug that in. Now what you'll see is that the receiver will start to blink, and then we can hit the bind button here, and that should now be bound. So what we'll see on the receiver is that that flashing light will go solid green, which it has. And now your radio is bound to your quad. So you can go ahead and just unplug the battery for a second. And now we're ready to set the receiver up in Betaflight. So make sure that your radio is ready to go, and then we're going to plug the USB-C back into the flight controller right here. And something that you'll notice after plugging this in is that actually the receiver doesn't power on. So you can see here on the receiver that there's no green light showing that there's power going to that receiver. So we're not going to be able to set this up in Betaflight without that. So you're going to put the battery back in to the XT60, and then it will start to flash, and eventually it will bind again to the radio. Okay, we have a solid green light now, and then when we go into Betaflight and go to the receiver tab, you'll see that the quad is like spinning around, and these axes are not necessarily going in the way that we want them to. So let's just put the throttle down there for a second, and you'll see this keep spinning. What we want to do is come down to here, which is the channel map, and then just change this to TAER123. And then we're going to hit save, and then that should sort out everything within this, as long as the radio is mapped to the right channel. So now when I do this, the throttle bar is going up and down. If I go side to side, that is adjusting the yaw, and then on the other side, same thing with pitch, up and down, and roll left to right, which now means that if I take control of the sticks, I should be able to control the quad as if I were flying it normally. And that is all correct. Perfect. So you'll see here that it says crossfire. That's because ELRS uses a crossfire protocol. We don't actually need to change anything else on this tab. So we can go ahead over to the modes tab here, and we're going to map our arm switch. So I'm going to click add range. And you can see this little slider thing here with an auto button. And what we do when we add this is basically I'm going to flick this switch, which I use for arm, and you'll see that that switches to aux4. And then I'm going to make that slider go up to this side. Then I'm going to set angle mode, just in case I want to give the quad to somebody that doesn't fly. And then I'm going to switch this to this position. That's going to switch to aux3, and then you can see I'm going to leave that tab in the middle. Horizon, I'm going to use the same button, but it's a 3-position switch, so I'm going to slide that all the way over to this side. So now I have angle and horizon modes set up. Okay, let me just switch those back off, and then I'm going to come over to beeper, and I'm going to add a range for the beeper. And I use this switch on this side, which is aux1. I'm going to move this slider over to this side as well. And then I'm going to come all the way down to flip over after crash, and then hit add range here. This is turtle mode, and I use this switch for turtle mode. So I'm going to flick that down and then move this range all the way over to this side here, and you can see that's on aux2. Some people like to put a pre-arm on there. I don't do that. And then I think that is us done for the mode switches. So we're just going to hit save. I'm just going to turn that button off quickly, and then we're going to come down to the motors tab. We're going to hit reorder motors, check that we've removed the props, and then what's going to happen is you can see one of the motors is spinning, and it's this one here. So we're going to click on that motor, then the next one's going to spin, and then we're going to click that one, and so on and so forth. And that's going to tell us which order those motors are in. So we're just going to hit save. And when that goes back in, we're going to go back to the motors tab and we're going to set up the motor direction. Now I prefer to have my props going out, so we're going to switch this to the other way. So we're going to hit this motor direction is reverse tab. This doesn't actually reverse the motor direction, it just tells Betaflight that that's what we want to do. So we're just going to save that and then come back to the motors and then hit this motor direction button. Now you get two options here. You can basically do a wizard or individually. I prefer to do this individually, but the wizard is a little bit easier. So click on the wizard, start and spin the motors, and then all the motors will start to spin. Grab one of your little baggies from the frame and then just touch the motor. That one is spinning inwards, which is motor 4. So by clicking that, it should now spin outwards. We're going to do the same on this side. That is already spinning out. And then motor 3 is already spinning out. But motor 1 is spinning inwards. So click on motor 1 in the wizard. And then that should change direction too. And now we've got all of the props, all of the motors spinning outwards. Okay, so we can stop the motors there and close that. And for this build, you don't need to touch anything else. You can go ahead and unplug the battery from the quad because we don't need the motors anymore. And now we're going to come down to the OSD tab. So just click on that. And OSD is your on-screen display, and you get all of these tabs along the left that allows you to add additional information to that on-screen display. I'm going to add battery average cell voltage. And I use average because then it doesn't matter which craft I'm in. It could be a 1S, it could be a 6S quad, or I could be switching batteries on the same quad, and I know that a 3.5 I need to start to come in. I like to keep my OSD fairly simple. So I'm going to just come down here and then go to link quality as well. And then I'm just going to move this up into the corner. And you can place these where you like. I just have like a standard way of doing this for me. And then I'm going to come down to RSSI dBm value. I'm going to add this over to this side here. And then RSSI value over here. And then you could put a timer in there, but on the DJI goggles, you get one of those as standard anyway. Just want to make sure that the warnings are on as well. And that's all good. And then on the right-hand side, we don't need to add anything on here at all. I think that's all good. And then I just want to include on these warnings, the link quality and the RSSI dBm. Just so that will flash up if I have an issue with my link while I'm flying. Underneath this, you have post-flight statistics. This is a bunch of statistics that pops up at the end of the screen. So I'm just going to turn on battery voltage. And I'm also going to look at, where is it? The link quality minimum and the RSSI as well. Okay, so that is my OSD setup. You've got a whole load of options that you can add on the left-hand side, like crosshairs, horizon bars, etc. But I like to keep my OSD fairly simple and clean. Okay, so hit save on the bottom right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a battery again. I've just changed the battery because my other one's starting to run out a little bit. You're going to definitely need a fan for this bit because we're going to set up the DJI Air unit and we don't want that overheating while we're doing this. You're going to need the DJI Assistant to Consumer Drone Series app, and that's going to allow us to activate and update the Air unit. So plug your USB-C straight into the Air unit. And then you want to grab your battery as well. And we're just going to plug that in just so that the Air unit gets some power. And once that's powered on, in just a second, you'll see this connect to the Assistant anytime now. And once that's connected, hopefully it says O4 Air Unit Pro. Click on that. We're going to start the activation, put your email in or change your account, and then just confirm, and this will start to activate. And once that's complete, you will then get this, which is the firmware list. And right now we have a update that we can do. So I'm just going to hit upgrade, start update, and then I'm just going to speed this up. This does take a bit of time, so I'm just speeding this up for the video. And then now it shows that we are on the latest firmware. All that's left to do is that we need to now bind the air unit to the goggles, and on the air unit you'll see this tiny little button here which you need to poke with a pokey stick, and then on the goggles there is a button in between the two lenses, so you press that, you'll hear a sound and they will be bound. Okay, so we're almost there. We're just going to tidy up a few things. So this wiring bundle that you have at the back with the receiver, we're going to grab one of your cable ties, and then we're just going to feed that cable tie through. We want to kind of tighten this up and just make sure that it is all tightly bound so it's not flapping around. There's no chance that that's going to get loose and chopped up while you're flying around. So we're just going to tighten this down. And the good thing about this frame is that if you've done this the way I've done it, when you put the top plate on, that is quite tight, so it's not going anywhere. But let's just tidy that up. I'm having an issue with the cable tie right now. And we're just going to pull this, just cinch this down a little bit more. Okay, perfect. Just snip the end of that off so it is not so long. And then with the receiver, I'm going to show you how to do this in a couple of ways. If you've got cable ties, take two of the cable ties and you're basically going to feed this through the standoff here. And then we're just going to tie this around one end of the antenna on this side. Just pull that tight, and then you'll see that also tied on the other side as well. And this is the way that you do this with cable ties. Oh, hang on 1 second. Let's just pull that a little bit tighter. We're just going to snip that off. And then we'll snip the other side as well, but let's just pull that tight as well. And we're going to snip that as well. This is a really easy method of doing it. I like to keep the antenna a little bit away from the rest of the quad. So I'm going to actually use a 3D print instead, but this will do completely fine. There's no issues with doing that, but I'm going to use this, which is a 3D print that I made, and I will leave a link to this 3D print down below. So if you want to get one of these printed, I'll show you how that looks, because it's a really nice solution. But we're just going to take off the O4 antenna. We're going to put the first part of this mount over the standoffs. Just like that. Let's just push that down just a little bit. And then we're going to just bring that up a little bit so I can fit the antenna in. And then I'm going to put the antenna just in the end here. And then we're just going to push the top part of this down as well. And then we can just move this all the way down the standoff. And then we can put our O4 antenna back on like this. Now that looks much neater. Let's just pull that in so that it sits properly. That looks much neater. It's away from the body. This is how I'm going to run the quad. As I said, you can do this with the cable ties. That's not a problem. Now it's time to put the top plate on, and you'll see these two countersunk holes here. You want to make sure that they're facing up. There's also this other piece, which is additional protection for the O4 air unit. And that's just going to balance on the front there. We're going to poke the XT60 through the hole on the top plate here. And then we're just going to make sure that everything fits in there nicely. In fact, something I always forget to do at this stage is put the battery straps on before I bolt the top plate down, because otherwise it's much harder to do that. But I'm going to run 2 battery straps. You can run 1. I prefer to run 2 just because of some accidents previously. And I run these battery straps in opposite directions just so it's extra secure. Okay, grab the top plate screw pack that came with the frame. And if you're going to add an action camera mount, grab that together with the screw pack, but I'm not going to do that for this build. You want your 2mm driver, and in the screw pack you have 2 long screws that are going to go in the front here because there's additional carbon, and then we're going to screw one of these in Bit of a balancing act with that screw. So I'm just going to put that in. You've got 4 short screws, and then one of those I'm going to put into the back here just to seat the frame. We're then going to grab another one of those long screws and put that in the other side of the front here. You've got 2 countersunk screws which go into this part of the frame here. That should be quite obvious, but you know. And then you're just going to feed the rest of those screws in, and I'm just going to put these battery straps on. And that is pretty much it. We're just going to add the propellers on here with the nuts that go on top with your 8mm box driver. You don't need one of these specifically. There are other ways of doing this too, but this is one of the easiest ways. So, and once those propellers are on, you have finished building this 5-inch Quadmula frame. We're just going to weigh this, and that comes to 396 grams without the battery, and then with this 1200 Tattoo R line, and that comes to 590 grams. And congratulations if you made it this far. That is your Quadmula Siren F5 Series 2 finished. And let me know if you built one of these in the comments below. If you have a YouTube video on that as well, I'd love to come and check that out. I like to see how other people are building these, even if they're slightly different. And just to finish off, I thought I'd show you my very first test flight with this, so you can see how this flies a little bit. It is very smooth. It does feel just as good to fly as my other S5 build, but with the 1950 kV motors, it has a little bit more go, and it is a little bit more power hungry, but I haven't done extensive testing of this yet. This is just a test flight because the weather here has been pretty bad, but I'm hoping to take this with me to the UK next week and then fly this around with some other people. And I'll get to go a little bit more crazy with this as well. I'm going to be flying this around a lot more, so you'll see this appearing in future videos. I have a few fun things planned for this year, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video.